I was going to make fun. I had a lot of fun planned for Holbrooke, who I've known for 40 years, who once was this, Hillary Clinton once actually, I will tell you this story, she once described Dick Holbrooke, this is during the campaign last year, as the only person in America who could be talking to my husband at a cocktail party and be looking behind him to see who else is there. But anyway, I wouldn't have done too much because he's lost his sense of humor years ago. If I had his job, I would have too. So I'm sort of, let me tell you what's so impressive about this. You're talking to somebody who was born from lower middle class Eastern European family. My parents came without education. They didn't get to high school. My mother would actually clean houses. I didn't pay for school. I went to the University of Chicago. I minimal money. And 11 years after graduating from college, as a freelance reporter, I'm sticking two fingers in 1969 into the eye of a sitting American president, a Republican, Richard Nixon, and describing the mass murder, as you heard in My Lai, to a nation that really had been inured to the consequences of war. World War II was sanitized for us. We really hadn't come to grips with the fact that the truth be that, alas, American soldiers, not surprisingly, fight wars no better or worse than any other armies. It's always the last resort. It's always brutal. It's always about payback, revenge for your buddy. It's not about the flag. And so I do this story in '69, and I get fame, fortune, glory. I get more money than I'd ever seen before, enough to put a down payment on a house. I get prizes like the Pulitzer Prize. And you say to yourself, what a special place. You have to say to yourself, this country is. No matter what, this is a country in which you can, the First Amendment, as I said, is there. And no matter how much you hear about how much they don't like us. And so I'm a strong believer that we're not going to be saved ultimately by politicians who always make political judgments, even in cases of war, life and death and war. It's always political, I believe. We may have an exception with this president, but we haven't seen it yet. We may, because we all have a lot of hope. You know, I don't know how Holbrooke was going to spin Afghan tonight. You know, dark light at the end of the tunnel, led by Karzai. But he was going to try. So anyway, here you come. I come from this notion that we have this amazing sort of power, this amazing right. We don't often do a good job. I don't have to tell you, after 9/11, instead of standing outside and holding George Bush to the highest standard possible, we were jingoistic. We fell in line. We didn't ask some of the questions. One of the questions that later occurred to me about 9/11, we learned at some point that September the 11th was the date planned by Al-Qaeda, all-powerful, mystical, all-knowing, omniscient Al-Qaeda. But I always started thinking, it was years later, I asked myself one day, suppose September the 11th had been like today, rainy, cold, cloudy, what would have happened to those guys hijacking? In other words, we didn't ask the right questions about WMD, obviously, even about Al-Qaeda. And so, but we're there. We are really, I think, more than any other unit in our society, in the Congress, even in the judiciary. We have some terrible decisions just made the other day in the Second Circuit in the case of the Canadian. We are there, and we have and tonight, I got to tell you, listening to Sushu and listening to this reminds me again that if we're going to get a salvation in the world, and I actually have had similar experience. I've spent a lot of time, literally 3, 4, 5, 6 visits in the last few years, talking to journalists in the Middle East, and the difference between what they do, what Sushu does, and what I do is the word courage has nothing to do with what I do. I do it and I'm exalted. They do it and they run risks. What the International Center is doing, and I'm making a pitch for them, I don't even know them that well, I'm just telling you, it's essential, because I have spoken, I was in Cairo, and I spoke to 60 journalists off the record. Mohammed Haikal, the great, wonderful, some of you may know, the great, wonderful journalist of Egypt, had me in his retirement. He's put money into a fund to encourage investigative reporting. I spoke to 50 or 60 journalists, many of them, half of them women, half of them wearing the Islamic garb. All had the same thing they wanted to know from me. How do they expose corruption? How do they expose wrongdoing? How can they get into military secrets? And they were coming to me. They were from Egypt, they were from Yemen, they were from Lebanon, they were from other places in the Middle East. All of them were listening to me expound about how to do this and that. The only difference being their reporting was going to lead to jeopardy for them. Mine doesn't. We live in a very special place. And so we really have to support this kind of stuff, because I'm going to tell you, if there's going to be a change in the world we live in, I think we and our colleagues in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa, in the Far East are going to have much more to do with it than any political leadership. In fact, I would argue the political leadership is going to drive it the other way. Clearly, we've seen in the last 8 years how much farther backwards we've gone, if that's English. It's pluperfect, German. Anyway, so the message is real simple. What do we offer? What we offer you is, people say to me, what do you do, what you do? And let me tell you, my theory of journalism, it's really pretty simple. I'm a parent. I live with my significant other. I have children. The trust is the core of the relationship. I don't lie to my children. I don't want to lie. I don't want them to lie to me. I used to say occasionally, with the exception of 13 to 15-year-old girls, but I've stopped saying that because I get too many hisses. But in Berkeley. But anyway, but the point is, quite seriously, so in my personal life, what do I do? In my personal life, like all of us, everywhere around the world, we want respect and trust in our intimate relationships and truth-telling. And in this country, particularly, given the presidents we've had, Johnson, Nixon, Bush, the same sort of demands and requirements that we make and we insist on having, we must have in our personal life, we don't begin to ask of our national leaders. Those people have the right to send our sons and daughters to die in the name of democracy. We don't begin to hold them to the same standards we hold our immediate family members to. And when you start realizing the extent to which it's a bad bargain for us, that we make a distinction between something that's so important to us in life, and we shrug off the inability to always believe our national leaders, what can I say? That's our job. Our job is to hold these people